What's the biggest mistake you see publishers making now?
The biggest problem right now is definitely visibility and discoverability.
Today I'm joined by the marketing veteran with nearly 30 years in the games industry. Do you think there's an abundance of good video games still?
There are more good games out there these days than there used to be. However, there are so many good games out there that people have never heard of.
We'll dig into real-world strategies developers and publishers like BioShock, Borderlands, and the Civilization series went through to market their games effectively today.
A lot of the big games too have this problem where it takes some time to really get you into it. Attention span is just lower than it used to be. The new generation, you lost them already.
What do people don't know that they don't know when it comes to like marketing and PR?
Put on a little marketing hat and think about like, who is this game for? And is there a market for that? Do your target audience research. Do your SWOT analysis. You create two axes and then you look at how do existing successful games fit into this axis, into this grid. Find where your game is at the current stage of development. And if it's right in the middle of 5 other games, then you might want to make a few adjustments, or else you're just going to get lost in a shuffle.
From 2K, Private Division, and Take-Two, this episode's guest, Markus Wilding. Markus, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. For everyone at home, Markus has been in the industry for 30 plus years, helped launch some global campaigns, BioShock, Borderlands, Civilization, and led international marketing as employee 26 at Take-Two and 2K and Private Division. These are all huge companies. And today we're going to get into what the transition has been, going from AAA big companies to consultant, and then the practical strategies developers and publishers need to market their games effectively today. So if you want to learn more about selling more copies, how to reach the right players, and how to avoid common mistakes, being either a consultant or anything regarding to marketing, then this episode will be for you. So, Markus, I want to start with your transition. So, a year ago, not so long ago, you only been a consultant now since November. You were leading marketing at Private Division. Now you're running your own business. So, I want to get your update, and I want to start with your LinkedIn post actually, because I found it very interesting. So I want to read some things and then ask for what's changed since then, if you don't mind. So you've had 6 new clients, traveled to Lisbon, London twice, you're going to GDC soon, gave 2 talks at conferences, but then you also work late almost every day, most weekends, work through a massive cold. And I wanted to ask you, like, what's been the biggest adjustment since going from like big company to kind of being more solo?
I guess the biggest adjustment really is that you have to be always on. When you're in a big company and even a smaller company, when you're an employee, even at a leading role, there's usually always someone that can help out, like whether when you're sick or when you're away, when you're on vacation. Or even when you're in a business meeting or traveling, somebody can always jump in and help out. And as a consultant, as a solo consultant right now, that's just simply not the case. You have to kind of be always on, and yeah, can't get sidetracked by silly things like a cold. If you don't, I mean, you always can, but you always have this feeling of, oh, I really should be working now, and I really should be responsive, especially at the beginning when you start to build a business. And I think that's probably also the biggest challenge, right? I've been blessed with having clients from the get-go, which is absolutely fantastic. I didn't expect that, but you feel responsible always to be there and to deliver good service, because, well, the gone is the regular paycheck, and you need to hustle really. But that's also at the same time very exciting and very exhilarating, because it's all on you, and when you deliver something good, then it's your result and your result only, and people are trusting you, and people have high expectations, hopefully, that you have to fulfill, and it's on you to do that, and that is something that keeps me going, and doesn't make me worried about working long hours.
Oh, amazing. And I resonate with a lot of with what you're saying. I had, I guess, my first mini vacation when I started from April last year. It was Christmas time pretty much. I had like a week of like no calls, and I was like, whoa. Now I can reset a little bit. But yeah, I've worked.
Well, you mentioned that LinkedIn post, and in that LinkedIn post, I asked, hey, if anybody has recommendations, please post them in the comments. And if you read the comments, you saw that most people said, oh, yeah, well, that's what this is. There were a few good comments too, but I guess everybody needs to understand that if they're going down the freelance route, if they're going down the consultancy route, there are certain things that you have to really be aware of, and make sure that it's not just you. I have a family. I've got a wife and two kids, and we had a lot of conversations leading up to this, and I had to discuss with them, are you okay with me not being around as often? Well, ironically, I'm also around more because I don't work in an office anymore, I work from home. But that I don't have that much time anymore, that the weekends aren't just for family as they used to. Fortunately, my kids are already a little bit older, so they're less dependent on me constantly being there. But you mentioned your workation. That's another thing. We love to do, or we still love to do family vacations, and I told folks, like the family, like, look, we can still do this, but let's rent a vacation home rather than going to a hotel, because if we do that, then I can spend some time, a few hours each day working when we're on vacation. Then I can be with you, maybe not the entire time, but I can also continue my work. I guess it's all about finding that balance, which is hard, especially at the beginning, but on in the long term. You mentioned this, it took you a while, but now you are taking a little vacation here and there, and I think that is something that you can't forget, because the burnout is a real thing, and you need to be a little bit careful there.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned before the call, you do a lot of different stuff. And what's helped me is try to kind of segment. So at the start, I was doing everything. And then after a while, you're like, okay, now my brother does all the outreach. His department, I'm more
Mhm.
just helping. But it does take a time to get there. But I think everything happens in season and you're in the hustle, let's go season. And I think it's exponential. Like if you did twice the work now, it's probably going to be like 5, 10x the results rather than just doing 1x, because all these things start to compound. So yeah, it's a very exciting time, and I can't wait to see more of what happens as well. So I want to start with the kind of biggest mistake you're seeing. So you mentioned you went to Gamescom, and then people were kind of asking you, "Hey, what does it take to work with you? We can't afford to hire you. Please, become a consultant so we can actually work with you." But what was the biggest problem you were seeing at Gamescom and over the past 6 months? Like, what's the biggest mistake do you see publishers making now?
Hmm. Um, so there are two things: the biggest problem, biggest mistake. The biggest problem right now, I think, is definitely visibility and discoverability. We've all seen the stats, like 19,000 games on Steam last year. Mobile, it's a lot worse than that, and there's new games coming out every day, every hour, and everybody is struggling with gaining that visibility. It doesn't matter whether you're AAA or whether you're indie or somewhere in between. Everybody is looking for answers, and if anybody had the answers, they'd be a millionaire right now. So there's no easy answer to that, of course. And the the biggest problem, that is the biggest problem. The biggest mistake, I think, is just keep on using tried and true methods in terms of marketing. There's this ongoing. I still see this all the time, where people are trying to apply um, marketing formulas that have worked 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I was there when they worked, which is like the big trailer, the big hands-on event, and then pushing the same systems, preview stage, review stage. Oh, let's bring in influencers, and we're only influencers. How do we pick the influencers? Oh, we pick the biggest ones. It's like, that's, first of all, you can only do this if you have a massive budget, and even when you do, then that's not necessarily the best approach. If you have a budget like the next GTA will have, then it doesn't matter. Then you can be everywhere. But I would argue that even smaller triple or double A titles these days don't have the budget anymore to be everywhere. So you need to be a lot more selective. And I think that's something that a lot of people make the mistake of, just, let's hire an agency and they'll figure it out. And because we don't have the bandwidth to do that, again, outsourcing is a topic. But when you don't have the internal brains to be able to look at what the agencies and the partners, the consultants, bring you, then that's very risky. Um, I used influencers before, and it's one of my primary examples, where influencer agencies more often than not just say, like, all right, this is the budget that you're giving me. you want reach. So here are the biggest influencers that we can buy the content for with this reach, which is something that is like it's rarely going to work unless you literally have millions to spend. What does work is you do your own homework, you know your game best, you do your research, and you look at, and a good influencer agency will do this with you, and you look at like who could be very interesting, and they might not have that reach, but they have the audience that engages with their content. And as we all know, content goes viral and content grows organically when there's lots of engagement. You can have 500,000 views or clicks on your video, and it doesn't go anywhere because people check it out for a little bit and then they move on. You can have 200,000 views on your video and 400 comments because people are engaged and interested and start talking about it, and then people post it on Reddit because they're interested. Um, a practical example that I usually use is at Private Division. We worked on Kerbal Space Program, which is this sandbox physics simulation where you shoot rockets to the moon and beyond, and you have these cute little green aliens, the Kerbals. When we worked on that, like there was already a lively community, but what we quickly learned is this is a niche, but it's a very big niche. It's a big niche of where people play these games that are interested in STEM, they're interested in rocket science. They don't even necessarily play video games that much, but they're interested in the simulation. So what we did was we reached out to influencers that sometimes didn't even cover games, but they covered rocket science and space flight. And we invited a few of them, or a lot of them, to our influencer event, which we held at ESA, at the European Space Agency in Amsterdam, where they could check out real rockets and then play the game. We had an influencer there. He went by the name of Reed Captain. He doesn't cover video games typically. He did this. He had at that time he had 200,000 followers, but one of his Kerbal Space Program videos had more than 1 million views because the news just spread. It was good content. It was relevant content, and I think that's often overlooked. That some of the biggest influencers are there to entertain and just to have fun, which is perfectly fine for them. But does it really help your game just because they have big reach? Like there needs to. That's just one example, and I'm sorry if going off on that, but that's something that is dear to my heart because every influencer is still like a buzzword. You have to have influencers. Of course you do, but you have to have the right ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that in my own, like, I guess, game buying habits, right? Like, if a video is entertaining, okay. But if it's, I think Balatro was a very good example for me. Like, they haven't used influencers, from my understanding, that much. But like, when I saw the marketing campaign after the fact, so maybe I'm not the practical example, but they do some weird ass marketing campaigns, and like
Yeah.
people engaged and a lot on Twitter, and I think Vampire Survivors does this as well, just like weird stuff that people just want to talk about. And then when you said like it's engagement, like it's relevant, and then
Mhm.
they have very big Discord communities, so then you're like, oh, I can actually like have a conversation now. This goes somewhere. It's not just awareness. Like we can actually have something that then becomes either a wish list or a customer.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Discord, so that's another thing that obviously everybody knows that having a Discord community is important, but a lot of people still think that, well, this will just build itself throughout the campaign if people are interested. It's like, no, you need to be very active there, and Discord is when you work with developers, and if you're a developer yourself, like this is a perfect opportunity to be active and communicate with your community, because what people crave there is authenticity. The worst thing you can do is hire a social media agency, and then just some random person that learned a little bit about the game is then your community manager and answers questions. Like people smell that very
Oh
quickly
yeah,
and smell that it's not authentic. The Discord or Reddit are just like perfect examples of thriving communities where, yes, they can be critical, and some developers shy away from interacting there, and we've all seen examples of people trolling there as well. But I think it's always worth to take the risk, because if you don't do it, then you're missing out. It's also something that allows you to build momentum without having to spend a lot of money. You have to spend a lot of time, though. That's very true. Um, but if you're a developer, if you're self-publishing, if you're looking for a publisher, um, publishers are more and more de-risking their investments, and one of the ways that help them believe in the success or potential success of a game is if there's already traction there, and a community is something that is always is an element that every publisher is now taking a keen eye on, and it's a bit of a conundrum for a developer, right? Because this is something that the publisher used to do. This used to be the responsibility of a publisher, and now they're being asked to deliver that themselves. Whereas a developer, I can understand that, is saying, "Wait a minute, isn't how can I build a community when the game is not really there?" But these days, it is worth like sacrificing a bit of the surprise element by announcing a game that nobody has ever heard of, by teasing certain elements of that game, and start to build a little bit of a word of mouth. And you can see very quickly if you have something new that people are interested in, or whether you still need to work on that and feed them content that they're interested in talking about. But when they are, it can gain momentum quickly, and then that really helps.
Yeah, for sure. Literally, my last episode on this podcast was with the CEO of a company called Leveler, and they do Discord um, integration where it helps you like kind of, especially with LLMs now, you can like track the sentiment in your community and like pull together the tickets. It was very interesting, and he was mentioning how some publishers and developers know they need to do it, but then don't because they're like scary. But then when they look at the ones that actually are doing it, like a developer or three has a few hours of their week dedicated to it, and it doesn't have to be that expensive. And exactly what you said when I asked some who've been on the show, like at least in this market, you need to have something where you can present, like, okay, what do you have? Great, a vertical slice, let's say. But
Yeah.
then what's the sentiment? But if you have like a number on Discord, it's like, look, real people.
See, this is you mentioned the vertical slice, and this is super interesting how this evolved over time.
Hmm.
20 years ago, you as a developer, if you had a cool game idea, you would go out and pitch it, and sometimes that PowerPoint presentation was enough. I was like, well, yep, cool, you got the team, you got the idea, you just go. Then publishers became more picky, rightfully so, because more and more games came about, and the risk was growing. I was literally a I was literally a gamer at an age where basically a new game interesting game would come out like once or twice a month, and that was it. There were months where there were no good video games this month, and now everybody has this abundance. So of
Do you
course,
think, I'm curious, do you think there's an abundance of good video games still?
okay, that's
Because
a
good
very
is a fun. Because I
now.
had the reason I bring this up is someone said, yes, there's 19,000 games on Steam last year, but that's because it's so much easier to make games where the standard of the good games year on year probably hasn't increased that much. That was the comment.
So super interesting topic. I think there are more good games out there these days than there used to be. However, there are so many good games out there that people have never heard of, because again, visibility.
Okay.
The 19,000 games per year or last year, by the way, that's a bit of a red herring, because Steam a few years ago has implemented something where the visibility of the games is greatly reduced if you don't fill certain elements, like having achievements, and having other elements in the game, which effectively means out of these 19,000 games, there's only last year there were only a good 4,000, I think 4,500 or so, that had a certain level of visibility. The rest of them you would actually have to know the name in order to
See,
find them.
that is something you don't see in all the headlines, which is like, that's actually a lot more
Yeah,
sizable,
it,
right? 4,500 games. How many of those are good?
it's even in the graph. If you look at if you look it up on Steam, the graph actually shows those more visible
It's
games.
never in the headline,
However,
huh?
yeah. However, 4,500 games is still 375 games a month, so there's still a ton, and that still means new games every day. Also, those 4,500 games doesn't necessarily mean they are great games. It just means they fulfill a certain element that makes it clear that they are no shovelware and not AI generated, at least to a certain degree. It's still, are there that many good games out there? I think the last couple of years, actually, there were less great AAA games out there because, well, we suffer from post-COVID. A lot of games got delayed. A lot of game like AAA is so hard to make these days that that there are now fewer games for the first fewer AAA games for the first time in quite a while. At the same time, there's more indie games than ever. There's smaller games, more smaller games than ever. I just played and the last weekend I binged through a game that I had never heard of, the pure coincidence, which was an absolutely fantastic game that mixes. It basically looks like 16-bit Zelda, but it's a bullet hell game where you shoot. Like, it's called Mini Shoot Adventures. Advertisement. Play this game. It's created by two French people, I think brothers even. Anyway, it's a fantastic game. It has all the charm of the early Zelda games, but it also has very modern twin stick bullet hell kind of gameplay. I would argue that 15 years ago, this game would have gotten a lot of attention because it's unique. It blends popular genres. It looks great, and it's just a lot of fun. Um, I don't think they sold more than a few thousand copies because, well, again, visibility. It's a very long-winded way to answer your question. I strongly believe there's as many good games as ever, if not more, than ever before. But it's very hard for people to find them. I will say there's less on the upper echelon on the AAA side, but there's still more than enough out there.
I'm curious because you're making me think now. Like, yes, that game would have got more attention 10 years ago, but in today's market, like the topic of the old game problem comes up on podcasts where you have player time going to Hearthstone, in my case, or like Fortnite, and it's just staying there, And then actually year on year, you have these players which will take years to kind of migrate and then play something else. So when we say that game is objectively good, but is that commercially viable today, even if it's enjoyable? Now, I'm not saying every studio needs to make millions and millions of pounds, but I think a lot of people make games with that hopeful ambition of selling thousands and like millions of copies. There's a question coming. So, if there's a lack of a huge marketing budget, my question is more on, I guess, market validation, right? Like, surely they knew that game, unless I'm being naive here, would not perform if it sold 1,000 copies. In my head, even if they threw all the marketing at it, there's a topic of like, can that be validated before that gets released? So my question is like, on market validation, like, where do people get it wrong? What is something they can consider?
So, super interesting topic because I agree. To me, the scariest stat last year was not the 19,000 games or the 4,500 games. The scariest stat was that what was it? Only 16 or 18% of the games that people spent time on Steam were released last year, and everything else was, to your point, the Fortnites, the Minecrafts, the Hearthstones of this world. And there seems to be this trend of games as a hobby, where people just play this one game. I mentioned Kerbal Space Program. If you look up the reviews for Kerbal Space Program on Steam, there are people who played this game for 3,200 hours, 2,800 hours. It's like, yeah, that's your game. That's your hobby. Your hobby is not video games. Your hobby is that game. We're not going to solve that because there is no way to solve it. We as an industry have educated. So it's another one of my favorite topics. We in our industry, we have educated the consumer to do things that we as an industry hate, which is bizarre, but it's our fault. Number one is we educated the consumer to never buy a game at full price because I remember 20 years ago when a game was discounted by 20-30% 6 months after release, there was an outcry as a people like, well, they're ripping off the people who bought it at day one because the game is now $40 instead of $60 6 months after launch. Today, that happens. First of all, it happens at launch. There's a launch discount. Then it happens like the game doesn't perform up to par. 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, the game is being discounted. Now, why on earth would I buy a game on day one unless it's the game I've been waiting for half of my life? GTA 6. very, very few games do that anymore, or it's a big franchise that that I just eagerly want to play it on day one. But that was only the beginning. We started doing that, so nobody buys a game at full price anymore. Then I shouldn't say we, because that's just one or two players in this industry, but it included that Microsoft started Game Pass, where it's like, hey, guess what? You don't have to pay for games at all. You just pay the platform holder. And then, of course, PlayStation introduced PlayStation Plus. So that's the other topic. There's a lot of people out there who don't buy games at all anymore, period, because they have their Game Pass subscription and there's hundreds of games on there. Why would I ever buy new ones? The same with PlayStation Plus, not to the degree, but still. So that's something that we educated our audience. And then to your point, the games as a hobby thing, games have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And for a very long time, it was the biggest topic was to how to retain the players. How do you make sure that they stay on board? First, we had regular games. Then we had games with DLC. Then we had games with live service. Then we had games with subscriptions. And that leads to a whole generation of players just playing one game or two games because there's so much content in there that even if they wanted to, they didn't really have the time. The first such game, I would argue, is World of Warcraft. And I can say that because I had a serious addiction to this game, to the point where I feel it almost cost me my marriage, and it certainly lost me some friends. And
my version was RuneScape. I had
yeah,
370 days on RuneScape of my life,
there you
like
go.
over a year logged in.
Not as much, but I have 160 or so on World of
Yeah,
Warcraft.
it's mad.
And so I've always been a very avid gamer, and having been part of the games industry for so long, back when people still spend money on games, I didn't have to, because I was like, hey, I trade you within the industry. You would trade your games at the new release. You would ring up the PR manager of another company. It's like, hey,
Got
wanna
any of those
trade
sweet codes?
Civilization against whatever game, and that always works. So I always played a ton of games. And then World of Warcraft came along, and after a while I realized I missed out on all the big releases of this year because not because I wasn't interested. I even got them for free from my industry friends, but they were just sitting there because I didn't have, or I felt that I didn't have the time. I was only playing this one game, and I had to stop doing that for various reasons. My wife being the biggest one, but I remember when I stopped doing that and started playing my pile of shame, I discovered, man, I missed out on so many games. But there are so many gamers these days who don't even go through that, who don't play a game for a year or two, but they play a game forever, and every game that comes in between is just a little snack in between. There you go. It's also and it's not going to be easier, quite the opposite. And I see this every day with my son. My son is 11 now, and he grew up in video game heaven because he had access to a ton of games. He also grows up in video game hell because his parents actually know that there needs to be certain limits, and so he has to deal with that. Now he can play, like, my library is massive, both on Steam, on PlayStation, Xbox. He has everything he ever wants. He plays 3 games. He plays Minecraft.
Can I guess them?
Yeah, you go. I spoiled the first one.
So we've got Minecraft. I'm going to say Roblox.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Third one, 11 years old. Fortnite?
Yes.
Hey.
Only just started or recently started, because we also look at age ratings. But yes. So those are the 3. He's still a big. He grew up on Switch. So and I'm a big Mario and Zelda fan. So he has all of these games. He spent hundreds of hours on Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but he liked these Nintendo games the most because they were open and you could try different things. I see that he has little interest in linear games. He has zero interest in story-based games. It's all about playing with his friends. UGC, of course, user-generated content is a thing. He builds the craziest contraptions in Minecraft. Fortnite is a little less creative there, but you all
got Lego Fortnite. I was playing that with my brother over Christmas. Like they
Well,
got such a big game that they've now made the game into a freaking games platform, and it's like,
it's
how are
funny,
you
isn't
gonna
it?
compete with that?
I have the neighbors boys who are a little bit older, and during COVID, I saw them online all the time on with Fortnite, and I said to them, look, wow, you're playing a ton of Fortnite, and they're like, well, most of the time we're not playing, we're just using the chat and we're just using the lobby and
Yeah,
hang out with our friends. So to your point, it's like the games turn into platforms. It's the same with Roblox. Like, and then Roblox actually is another topic, or puts a spotlight on another topic. Games have become more and more realistic, and the graphical fidelity is incredible. But there's a whole generation of gamers that could not care less. My son being one of them. Like he plays games. Like I look at those and I'm like, dude, you have, we can play Uncharted and we can play the greatest looking games out there. And he plays Stickman and games that look
I have
like
a rumor, a theory why, because
okay.
I had been playing RuneScape for a long time. Then they revealed old school RuneScape, and
Right.
there's something about always knowing your game's going to be reactive and it's just things are going to happen. And I
Mhm.
feel like, at least with the current tech, I experienced this with Red Dead Redemption 2. I had a maxed out PC. The graphic wasn't maxed out, but like I had 128 gigs of RAM, had an okay Nvidia card, and Red Dead Redemption was like an old game at the time. And I was like, I just want to play this on the lowest setting because I just don't want to lose a frame because I'm just so used. I
Right.
don't want to
Mhm.
have to feel anything. If I had a console, it'd be less of a problem. But yeah, like the games I play are just Balatro because it's just nice and easy. I can see what's happening, and then kind of to your point,
Mhm.
I care more about the feeling and like what's my experience going to be, and yeah, and
Yeah.
the idea that I spend as a developer millions of pounds making it look good, when that, in my opinion, could be a negative unless you're GTA 6.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's the reason like we got indie games coming out and then making some money rather than like the triple A big gambles.
And I think this is a remnant of an industry trend that had been going on for decades, really ever since the 80s when the first, or 70s, but the 80s really when the first video game consoles came about. Every new game had to look better than an older game, and every new games console generation and every new graphics card on a PC had to significantly improve the graphics, not necessarily the gameplay, but it was all graphics driven. And this over time has diminished. I remember when the PlayStation 2 came out, and I made the jump from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2. Mind blowing
Yeah,
the
I
way
had the
the
same feeling.
graphics evolved. I remember putting in the first 3D graphic cards into my PC, and all of a sudden, all the hard cuts were gone. And I was like, this is amazing. This is absolutely incredible. PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4, still big difference. PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5, I don't know. Some games you have to really look into, like zoom in
Yeah,
to see the details. And yet, every time, not every time, a lot of times in the industry, especially in AAA, it's all about the graphics and the graphical fidelity. And then you add open world to it, and then that blows up your dev cost and the teams that you need, completely out of proportion. Meanwhile, people play Roblox, Balatro, and Vampire Survivors and enjoy it to no end.
yeah,
So I think as an industry, there needs to be this we need to put more emphasis on the core, what makes games fun. Funny enough, last week I attended DevCom Leadership Summit in Lisbon, and the keynote speaker was Sean Layden, who used to be the CEO of, or the president at Sony America. And his whole keynote talk was about, we need to find the fun and we need to go back to the basics. And it sounds like a Captain Obvious thing, right? I mean, games are always about fun, aren't they? But that was my whole rant right now, is that sometimes we lose that. Sometimes we think that we just need to have technical achievements, but that's not really what the players want. That's not what the gamers want. The gamers just want to have fun, and finding the fun is key. Does that solve the problem that games have turned into a hobby? No. And this goes back to the old thing. Like, if I had an answer for that, like, I'd be rich,
yeah.
because everybody's looking for that answer. But I don't think the answer can be, okay, forget about it. Now we all need to develop a game that can be a forever game, because that's never going to work. We need to build alternatives that at least drag away people for some time, and that constantly happens. I don't think people will play Balatro forever, and I seriously don't think people will play Vampire Survivors forever. But it's those games that you can return to all the time in between other games and have fun. And I think that's there's something to be said about that. My favorite, not forever game, but game that I've played for 5-6 years now is Slay the Spire. It's an indie game, turn-based, card roguelite card battler. I now have, I looked it up recently, 400 something hours, and that's not because I never play anything else. Quite the opposite. But it's my go-to game. If I have half an hour and I don't want to start a new game or continue a massive session, I just play one run and then I'm good. And I think that is something that a lot of these games have in common, because sticking with those examples that you used, Balatro, Fortnite, um, Vampire Survivors, you can jump in, play it for half an hour, and have a satisfying experience. You
Yeah.
can also play it for 3-4 hours at a time and enjoy it too. But a lot of the big games too have this problem where it takes some time to really get you into it. And I think that is actually something that is a concern. Again, having kids and teenagers, I can see that the attention span is just lower than it used to be. And if you have start a game and the first 20 minutes is mainly CGI intros, and you occasionally push a button before the real action starts, the new generation, you lost them already. That's a tough sell. So that is something that I think everybody needs to keep in mind, like getting to the fun quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're looking at a design challenge here, I guess. The
Mhm.
thought I'm having here, I had Alexander Brazzi on the podcast, and we talked about Balatro, and we did a bit of role play. And he mentioned one thing that Balatro does really, really well is when you finish a game of Balatro, the restart button is just like, it's like, boom, I'm back in. Snackable, enjoyable, and you use the word satisfying. Like I'm reflecting on Red Dead Redemption 2. I couldn't get satisfied unless I played an hour plus, which meant I couldn't play it on like 5 of the 7 days of the week because I had work and gym. So it's just like, even though I've paid the $60, so it's like I don't reflect on Red Dead Redemption 2 and thinking, wow, what an amazing game, because it's just the ramp up time took too much. And
Yeah.
that's just someone who, had a bit of time at the time. What I want to do
Absolutely.
now, sorry, Marcus.
Oh, just one add on to that, because I think that's a very, very important point, and I think we can all learn from the mobile games industry a little bit there, and that is that retention loop and that satisfaction that you can have, because I mean, sometimes it's done cheaply, but we all like the shiny new thing. Vampire Survivor, you start this game and you play the first 2, 5, 10 runs, you get an achievement every time. You unlock something every time. Over time, it gets harder to do something new, but you get this instant gratification of, oh man, I died, but look at what I got. I want to try this out. I got a new weapon. I got a new character. I got a new game mode. I want to try that. That is something that the mobile games industry has done and is doing incredibly well. And I think that that should happen more often.
Yeah, for sure. That snackable gameplay. I think personally, I actually don't play games unless they're roguelikes anymore. I just decided because
Mm-hmm.
I just know that if it's a roguelike, it's designed in a way where it's going to be fun, even if I don't get good, because like the start is still a challenge. That's another
100%.
thing. Um, cool. I want to think of the listener here who potentially is maybe one of your clients. So
Mm-hmm.
could you walk me through like what happens when a developer comes to you? They have a game coming out. They know they need help with marketing strategy. Like, what is the first thing they could do to kind of like self audit themselves? Like, just to like, where am I at? Like, what I'm looking for here is like, what do people don't know that they don't know when it comes to like
Mm-hmm.
marketing and PR?
I think one thing that's really underestimated is, because sometimes developers don't really like marketing or don't want anything to do with that, because they feel it's something that the publisher or somebody else needs to do for them. I feel they need to look at their game from the very beginning, from the ideation, and put on a little marketing hat and think about, like, who is this game for? Like, what's my target audience? a common trope for a very long time that I hear still to this day from developers is like, oh, we're creating games that we want to play. That's cool, but then that, like, who else wants to play them? And is there a market for that? And that is something that I feel is often overlooked. Like, you have to go through these notions of do elements of the marketing plan, but do them when you start thinking about what the kind of game that you want to make. Do your target audience research. Do your SWOT analysis. Create that. A lot of people may have seen this as like this competitive grid where you create two axes, and then you look at how do existing successful games fit into this axis, into this grid, and then find where your game is at the current stage of development. And if it's right in the middle of 5 other games, then you might want to make a few adjustments, or else you're just going to get lost in the shuffle. Um, it's a Obviously you need to bring in marketing experts before you want to announce the game, and obviously when you want to launch the game, and all the way in between. But I think it would be very beneficial for a lot of developers to bring in an expert very early on and take a look at their game design document rather than and the game itself, of course, if there's something playable there, to get a thorough analysis of, is there a market for the game? And obviously nobody has the 100% answer for that, but over time you get a certain feel for it. And when it's early on, there's still an opportunity to make adjustments. When you're a year and a half into development, and then you realize, oh man, this mechanic isn't really, the train has moved on, there's no audience for that anymore. You can throw away 6 months of development and start something new. But when you're that early on, there's still an opportunity there. So I would say either find someone who can help you early on with marketing expertise, or put on your marketing hat. There's tons of information out there in order to analyze games and how to create a marketing plan and whatnot. Do that, but not for your finished game. Do it for your early stage
Got it. Yeah, I had a CEO of Rank One on the podcast. They have a tool where it's a self-input platform where people put the games they like to watch, and then I think they like to play, and it's just, I think they've got over like 1 million just manually inputted stuff, and
game. Okay.
then as a developer, it's free to use. You could see which games, players of which game like other games.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a successful game going on, but then they also like these type of games, and then you can see, this genre and this genre, maybe I should put something in there. So that's one tool I know that people could kind of look to make that grid. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you a question on bring a marketing expert in early. I've spoken to people who've got burnt, right? Like you mentioned, there's some marketing agencies who come in, and God bless some agencies, but sometimes the incentives don't align, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there might be an incentive to, you know, do it in this marketing way because that's where my expertise is. Where actually we should go under the niche influencer route, or we should go under the make a trailer that's going to get viral on TikTok and then
Mm-hmm.
funnel into a Discord route. Like these are very different skill sets in my head. So how do you go about finding that external help that is going to be relevant for your game? Because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's a hard ask to say, "Hey, developer, put the marketing hat on." When it comes to the time you need a marketing expert, like what questions am I supposed to be asking?
Okay, so this might sound, again, very obvious,
Hmm.
but you'd be surprised how often that's not being asked. Like, don't like how much of a gamer are the people that you're hiring? Like, the marketing experts, do they truly understand games? Do they truly understand your game,
Hmm.
and your area? When you bring in a marketing expert early, let me put it the other way around. You bring in the marketing team at the tail end. You already have momentum. You already know that there's an audience for that. You can bring in, I would argue, almost any marketing agency with certain expertise. How to pull the levers. They know how to create the ads. They know how to reach, which audiences to reach. Fairly easy. If you do this early on, you need somebody who truly understands games, and who also understands how development works, because there's no point in making bring someone early, and then they create a plan for you that um, doesn't really work with what you have, what you have in terms of resources and the skill set that you have. You need to have people who understand both sides, both the development side and the marketing side. It's very the earlier you come in, the more you need to understand the process. Back again 20 years ago in AAA, um, I had a constant fight with our then VP of production, who refused to, even internally, who refused to give the marketing team early builds of the game that he was working on. And I'm like, come on, we need to understand the game in order to properly market it. Like, what are you doing?
Why
He's
do you
like,
think he
well,
was doing that? Why do you think that
well,
happened?
he told me, he said, you guys don't understand game development. And if I give you an alpha build, then you're just going to complain about the bugs and the graphics, and you will
Was he
not be
right?
able to, like,
Was he right?
was he right? You know what? I hate to say it, but for some people of the team, that was the case. He got burned by showing a game early, and then this was back at 2K, where we had a lot of games, and he said I showed a game early on, and from then on I was the ugly stepchild because people felt that this game is not going to be a success. I'm not going to say which game it was because it turned out a big success. But people didn't believe in it, at least certain people on the marketing team, because I showed them the game too early. So now I'm only going to show you the game when it's beta or whatever and it looks great,
Wow.
which put us on the back foot because then the marketing team was brought in too late. But there was this common consensus back then that the marketing people are the suits. They are the ones who only think about numbers and business and don't really understand games. And I think this has changed. I rarely to speak to people on the marketing side who are, well, nobody's clueless about games or else they wouldn't be here. But usually they have a good understanding, but often it's an understanding as a consumer, as a gamer. And that's good. But if you want to talk shop with developers at the early stage of their development, you also need to understand how, to a degree, how, I'm never going to be a game developer, but how game development works, how milestones work, how the different stages of pre-production, production, and so on work, or else you will give bad advice. So that's certainly something to take into consideration, and that's something you have to learn. Like there's like if you're a gamer, you understand and you understand games. That's great. Everybody can do this over time. You engage with the hobby, and over time you grow your experience. But game development is a different story, and lots more to unpack there.
Yeah. Awesome. And that's a good like checklist to have, I guess, mentally. Fantastic. So wrapping up here, in terms of just things that you want to kind of, I guess, tell the world, I guess, is kind of the way I'm going to be phrasing it now. But I usually ask us at the end, is like, what do you want to tell people that you don't think is being said right now? What is a common thing that you feel like you have to repeat yourself when it comes to what you do?
I think the one thing I want to say right now is I'm an eternal optimist, and and there's a lot of doom and gloom right now in the games industry, and of course a lot of it is a lot of it deservedly so. We still see layoffs every other week, um, but the games industry is very resilient, and I say that as somebody who has been there since the 90s, and I was there in 2007, 2008 when the internet bubble burst, and everybody all the investors pulled the money out of tech and games, and everybody thought it was the end of the world. It's not. Like, people compare the situation now to that and say it's so much worse now. It's actually not. It's the games industry was much smaller then, so the layoffs, the numbers were smaller, but the percentage of people affected was almost, if not that, as high as it is now. And the games companies and the games industry has come back, and it will come back here too. People will always play games. They will change how they play games, and I understand that the last hour, what we talked about, a lot of it was negative and was lamenting over the trends in the industry. But people are always interested in fun ways of getting into becoming entertained, and we just need to continue to reinvent ourselves as this industry has always done, and see this as an opportunity, which sounds brutal when you probably just lost your job. It's like, see this as an opportunity, but there is the number of new studios that are being founded right now is staggering, and some of them are founded out of necessity because, well, people need to band together and find something new. But I'm absolutely sure that a couple of years from now we were going to see a resurgence of new, starting as indie studios and then growing with a whole new generation of games that hopefully will keep the interest going. And then I say hopefully, but I know it will be because people will always play games.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement there. I think there's always opportunity in chaos, and we highlighted, yes, the things that are more difficult, but we also mentioned the explosion of indie, and then also the delayed effect of all these studios that came up, which I then we're going to probably see in 2027 as well. So I definitely echo that. Marcus, thank you so much for the conversation. Where can people find you?
Thank you for having me. People can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Markus Wilding, but also on my website, beyondthewall.games.
Fantastic. Marcus, thank you so much.
Thank you.